Hello and welcome to the Girls Fuel podcast. My name is Haley. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition coach here to help you along your health and fitness journey by providing evidence and experience-based knowledge and, as always, full transparency. Today's episode is extra close to our hearts. We are going to be talking about your thyroid and how thyroid is so much more than just your metabolism and your ability to lose weight. It truly impacts everything. We're going to dive into lab testing and give you some of our experience with the thyroid. So, Jess, I'm going to let you kick this one off.
Yeah, so like Haley said, the thyroid is very near and dear to Haley and I's heart. I think we're both victims of being treated by conventional medicine doctors who often miss a suboptimal thyroid for a thyroid condition, and it's not their fault. It's just that I think that Western doctors don't necessarily do a comprehensive check on someone's thyroid. So today, what I really want to cover is I want to give you a general overview of the thyroid, how it's more than just your metabolism. I think it's really a big topic right now because, oh, the metabolism, it helps you lose weight. So we need to have an optimal thyroid. But the thyroid actually supports so many other mechanisms in the body that I want to talk about today. Let's dive into the thyroid panel as well. So I want to talk about what doctors usually test for thyroid, but the other markers that are also important as well, what thyroid hormones are, why they matter, and how to interpret your own lab work so you can not only understand your body better, but also advocate for your own health. I really want to talk about that because I think that if I've learned anything on my own health journey and as a coach, it's that we need to advocate for ourselves. And sometimes it means just educating ourselves just a little bit more to understand our thyroid and also our other organs, our other body's mechanisms as well. Do you have anything to add to that, Haley, before I kind of start us off on talking about what the thyroid even is?
Yeah, no, I really like how you said that how we need to learn so we can advocate just
Yeah.
because like you mentioned, thyroid issues are easily the most common things that we see, either misdiagnosed or just not
Yeah.
fully recognized for what they are. The
Yeah.
As we'll get into towards the end, the lab reference ranges that the doctors use compared to what we use as functional practitioners are going to be very different. So that's where we'll talk about what it might mean if you feel like you have a lot of the thyroid symptoms that we talk about, but your doctor says your labs are normal. But yeah, kick us off with what the thyroid even is.
Okay. So the thyroid is a small butterfly shaped gland located at the front of your neck, and it plays a massive role in keeping your body running smoothly. I really like calling it or thinking of it like the engine of your entire body. I'll talk a little bit about the functions of the thyroid because, like I said, it is more than your metabolism. So, yes, it helps regulate our metabolism. So, the thyroid produces T3 and T4, which controls how the body uses energy, affecting our metabolic rate. So, I think a lot of people are talking about, okay, I need to increase my metabolism. I want to increase my metabolic rate, things like that. But a lot more goes into it than just eating more food. The other functions of the thyroid, so it supports growth and development, so proper growth and brain development, but also muscle development and bone development, which is really important, especially as women as we age. The function of the thyroid in heart and circulatory health. So the thyroid regulates your heart rate and blood pressure. Something really interesting that I've learned lately is I have a very low heart rate. I have very low blood pressure. My thyroid is also optimal. So my body doesn't produce enough thyroid hormone. So making those connections is really important as well. Body temperature regulation. So it controls how much heat the body produces. I generally lean towards hypothyroidism, and I'm very sensitive to cold. So it's really interesting how you can just connect the dots this way as well in terms of mood and cognition. So it influences your brain function, your mood, emotional regulation. So, for example, we have a client who was on prescribed thyroid hormone. Her thyroid hormone was a little bit improperly prescribed. She was taking a little bit too much thyroid hormone. She was extremely irritable. She had a very high anxiety levels, a lot of restlessness. And it's interesting because once we lowered the thyroid hormone through her doctor, of course, she experienced none of these symptoms, like a complete drop off of these
That was
symptoms.
crazy.
Yeah, right. And now she's reporting zero symptoms on all of her check-ins, which is makes me so happy. And then low thyroid hormone. So some symptoms would be depression, like brain fog, anxiety, and things like that. In terms of digestive health, speed of digestion, with individuals who have low thyroid, they're going to be usually predominantly constipated, whereas individuals who have high thyroid hormone will be more along the lines of experiencing menstrual health, but helps regulate your menstrual cycle and reproductive health. There's a function in skin, hair, nails. So hypothyroidism, you'll often have like brittle nails, thin hair, things like that. And then cholesterol. So it helps break down your cholesterol. Lower thyroid individuals have higher cholesterol usually. And it's interesting because all my life I had higher liver enzymes and higher cholesterol. So interesting when we connect the dots here. Haley, what do you want to add to this? I know that was a massive list, but I just want to point out that it's so much, the thyroid is so much more than your metabolism. It really helps function in a lot of different areas in the body.
No, I thought that was great. I thought it was really helpful. And I love the breakdown with every different kind of system or symptom as far as what a high thyroid function, so more hyperthyroid versus hypo, sluggish thyroid might look like. The cholesterol one is really interesting. And I see that a lot. And that's where we get into the triad kind of like metabolic health, where we see that high cholesterol, we see that high blood glucose, as well as the sluggish thyroid function that unfortunately is a little all too common with aging, especially for women. And as we go through perimenopause and menopause, and our sex hormone production and thyroid production naturally go down. So that's where really understanding the capacity of our thyroid is going to be helpful. And I know we're going to get into this as far as like, why should you care? But speaking from like both of our personal experiences with sluggish thyroid function, and I'm sure those of you who I have so many DMs that with conversations with people that are like, my TSH was 5 and but my T3 and T4 were quote unquote normal. And I'm like, none of that is normal. No wonder not only can you not lose weight, but your hair is falling out and you have trouble remembering things and your cycles are 42 days long, right? But it does also go back to your capacity to diet in the future. So that's where double checking your thyroid labs yearly, if not more regularly than that, is going to be really, really important, because I can use myself for an example. I thought about doing a little bit of a, like, we call it a mini cut, 8 to 10 week in and out this fall. But when I got my labs done, my thyroid function was not where I wanted it to be. It was quite a bit more sluggish, and it also showed signs of stress. So right away, I was like, well, we're not dieting, because dieting adds stress, and stress is one of the biggest contributors to poor thyroid health, right? Under eating, chronic levels of stress, be that environmental, mental, psychological, financial, like all of these things tie into our thyroid health. But I thought that was a great breakdown. And I would love for you to summarize for us like some of the common thyroid conditions and what people can look out for.
Absolutely. So common thyroid conditions, the one that I was talking about a lot, is hypothyroidism. This is when the body produces too little thyroid hormone. Some common symptoms of sensitivity to cold, constipation, anxiety, and brain fog. Then there's thyroidism. So that's when the body produces too much thyroid hormone. And so you can have symptoms. Common symptoms are diarrhea, irritability, anxiety, warm body temperature, things like that. Those are the most common thyroid. There are also thyroid conditions that are related to autoimmune diseases as well. And those are very different. So maybe I'll get you to explain the difference after I explain the two autoimmune diseases. The first one being Hashimoto's. So this is when the immune system attacks the thyroid, causing to produce too little thyroid. So I think one of the main things that I want to get across too is that hypothyroidism and those are two very different things. So you can have a completely normal thyroid, but still have Hashimoto's. However, if you continue your life with Hashimoto's without making any changes, it can eventually lead to hypothyroidism. And then the other autoimmune disease is Graves' disease. So this is when the immune system attacks your thyroid, and that could eventually lead to causing. And so what I've experienced personally is that, yes, over the years, my thyroid has increasingly been producing less and less thyroid hormone, but I never ever got my thyroid antibodies checked. Once I did get my thyroid antibodies checked, they were extremely high, and they still are, which is something that I'm working through right now. However, it's interesting because my thyroid was leaning towards suboptimal, but it wasn't horrible. Really, what was causing my hypothyroidism is, I think, Hashimoto's. So, Haley, I think maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on that as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a great description. And I agree with you why you're having the Hashimoto's antibodies. So, with Hashimoto's or Graves, and Hashimoto's is, in my professional opinion, a lot more common and less dangerous than Graves' disease. Is often associated with Graves, where we have that increased thyroid function. In Graves' disease, it's caused by thyroid stimulating auto. So we have that TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, in our body that comes from our brain down and stimulates our thyroid and says, hey, thyroid, can you produce the active thyroid hormone T4 and a little bit of T3? The real activation of T3, which is like the gas of our metabolism, that is our active hormone that is able to help us do all the wonderful things that Jess talked about to regulate our bodies, is what we need in order to have a really optimal thyroid function, is sufficient amounts of T3. In Graves' disease specifically, the antibodies are attacking the TSH receptor, where we will see an increased production of that TSH, leading to increased production of those thyroid hormones, where with Hashimoto's, it's more often associated with hypothyroid, and it's associated with the TPO, thyroid peroxidase, and thyroglobulin antibodies. So when somebody has Hashimoto's, we'll see an elevation in the TPO, in the thyroglobulin. A lot of times doctors will ignore these technically, and we're going to get into labs, but I just have to make a point with this. I have seen clients Hashimoto's TPO antibodies at like 300, and their doctor wasn't worried about it. I like to see those less than 9 for reference. So like Jess mentioned, the antibodies that are working against, that are attacking our thyroid gland, are causing damage to that thyroid gland. So Hashimoto's is one of the main causes of hypothyroidism. A lot of doctors do not test your Hashimoto's antibodies. That's where hopefully if you get one thing out of this podcast, ask for those antibodies, especially if you've had issues with sluggish thyroid in the past. But Hashimoto's is an autoimmune response where basically, like Jess mentioned, it's the body producing antibodies against itself because it notices a threat. We're not going to go too deep down this autoimmune rabbit hole right now, but a lot of prevention can occur for autoimmune conditions as a whole by supporting gut health, by supporting immune state and all of that. But Hashimoto's is very, very common, and it causes the majority of hypothyroid cases. So that's where even if you have those antibodies, like kind of like Jess does, they're higher, but your thyroid function looks pretty normal, you need to address that.
Okay.
Because if there's more stress in your life, if other things trigger that Hashimoto's to get worse and worse, those antibodies to climb and cause further damage to your thyroid function, is going to take a hit. Like I have one client who, she has mold, and that's the root cause of it for her, where her thyroid has flipped between hyper and hypothyroidism like 3 different times in the last year. And it's related to the antibody reaction and the threat to her thyroid. So if your antibodies are high, even if your thyroid levels are normal or within the normal range, you are going to need to add support to calm that autoimmune response. But yeah, that's the gist of what the conditions are. And women are so much more likely to develop thyroid problems than men. I think Jess mentioned a statistic. What was it? 5 to 8 times more likely?
Yes. And I find that super interesting. Like, women are one of the ones to commonly detect thyroid issues. We are 5 to 8 times more likely than men to develop thyroid problems. I'm actually not sure why. Do you know why, Haley?
Yeah, anecdotally, from my like personal coaching experience working with women, primarily women for so many years, as well as just like other research on hormones differences in men and women, I think it's just because as women, we are so much more prone to stress-driven disease. And we can think about as a stress-driven disease. If you haven't already done so, go back and listen to last week's episode where I talked about the immune system and how big of a role it does play in the development of things like Hashimoto's, of Graves' disease, of like IBD, IBS, and some of these more chronic illnesses. We're more prone to that from, I think, just from birth aspect, but we also do so much more to stress our bodies out, right? We spend so much time under eating and chronic dieting. Almost every
Yes.
woman that comes through our door has suboptimal thyroid function. And that's not always something that needs to have a big protocol. A lot of times it's like, hey, can we spend time making sure you're getting the proper amount of vitamins and minerals specifically that are important for thyroid health? And can we eat enough food and reduce stress, right? Because the best way to raise your thyroid function is going to be to eat more carbs and eat an anti-inflammatory diet, right? More Mediterranean style, especially if we're suspecting some autoimmune components there. But I do think that it's just the nature of women. And we also think about women in the sense of like moms who do it all, right? I always joke with my fiance that I'm going to be a great mom because I snap into mom mode. And if you're listening to this and you're a mom, please verify that this is what mom mode feels like when it's like all the kids are crying, the kitchen is a mess, but somehow you can stay calm and just like zip around and do all the shit. That is what I say when I'm jumping into my mom mode when my cats are crying, someone knocked over the water bottle, someone vomited on the floor, the kitchen's a mess, we're trying to get out the door, and I'm like, all right, everybody shut the hell up, get out of my way, and I got this, right? So we think about it, women are just natural caretakers, and we also put ourselves last. I like get the chills talking about it. And I hope some of you have a similar response because I know that as women, we put ourselves last, whether it's after our families, after our work, whatever it is. So again, thyroid issues are so stress driven. And I just think women are significantly more prone to that. And there's research to back. That's why think about how like we are a functional coaching practice. We have so many more women come to work with us than men. Granted, we are called girls fuel. So that's fair. But even thinking about coaching for the last 10 years and having so many friends in the business, it is mainly women that need help with these more functional issues. So that's my thought on it. And not to get on too much of a tangent, but it is, again, it's going to be very stress driven.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that we should demonize ourselves and be like, oh, I have to baby myself because of my thyroid. It really is about finding a middle ground. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more after we talk about lab testing. So let's dive into that. Jess, what is the thyroid panel?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the thyroid panel. Thyroid hormone test is the thyroid stimulating hormone. This is what your doctor will most commonly check. Honestly, I didn't even get my doctor didn't even do my thyroid panel until I was, I think, a year ago. And then once I learned more about it, so all they checked was my TSH, my thyroid stimulating hormone, and it was awesome. It was in a normal range. That normal range is 0.5 to 4. I think I'm using the US numeric for that.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So 0.5 to 4. When I first got my TSH checked, I think it was around 2. And I got it checked again. It was around 3.4. It's increasing, but it's still normal. So no one's going to check anything further in terms of a Western conventional doctor. If your doctor checked it, that is awesome. I'm still waiting to find a doctor like you have. The thyroid stimulating hormone, so this is released by the pituitary gland and signals the thyroid gland to make and release thyroid hormone. And so this is the first marker doctors look at, and this is why there's a big problem because the thyroid stimulating hormone doesn't measure actual thyroid hormones, which is T3 and T4. The reason why this is a problem is because T can fluctuate. I did a ton of dieting when I was younger, way too much, and I restricted my food. My TSH fluctuated substantially. And the other reason why this is a problem is because in case there's conversion issues. Once the thyroid stimulating hormone signals to release thyroid, there has to be conversion from T4 to T3. And if that conversion doesn't happen, then your thyroid can still be suboptimal, even if TSH looks normal.
That's really helpful. So yeah, whenever you go get labs now, just as a rule of thumb, ask when you're going, they almost always automatically run TSH, but I would just put in a
Yeah.
note and say, hey, can we also look at free T3 and free T4? Because those, again, are going to be what actually shows us how thyroid is functioning. A lot of times, doctors, because from my understanding, and this is from talking with my doctor about this, because I just had to know,
Mm-hmm.
like, when somebody asks for lab testing and you say, no, you don't need it, like, why? Like, what really happens there? Like, why can't you just run things? My doctor is, I have a very good relationship with my GI doc just because I know her in person. She's a little bit functional. We're kind of friendly. And we had this conversation more specifically talking about like antibiotics, but I asked her if this was true for labs as well, where in order to be able to run something, especially if it's something that they're trying to do through your insurance, they need specific like diagnostic codes, right? For something like a T3, they may need to be like hypothyroid. They may need an actual diagnostic code. So a lot of times whenever I have clients try to ask for all the thyroid hormones, they'll only get TSH and T4 and they won't run T3. So that's where you need to ask for free T3 and free T4. They may run total T3 or total T4, and that's like a little helpful, but not really, because what is free is active and that is floating around and able to bind and be utilized in the body. So if you're going to your doctor for your yearly, just ask if you never had them done. If this is my very unsolicited advice, this is not my professional advice. If you need to, they're like, why do you want those done? You could just be like, I've never looked at it and I want to be sure. You might also want to tell them that you're having some symptoms of thyroid downregulation, which odds are you are, like fatigue or hair loss is another common one, especially with Hashimoto's. And when we have we're going to see a lot more like damage, so to speak, to other systems, because again, a lot of times when we have some sort of autoimmune condition, it is an immune response. So it's more systemic. Leaky gut is also often involved. So with Hashimoto's, the symptoms are going to be a lot more severe than hypothyroidism, and we might see more differentiation in symptoms. So we might see more hair loss, we might see more skin damage, we might see greater levels of fatigue or poor recovery or GI exacerbation. So whenever you're noticing those symptoms, you might just be able to say, hey, I've been experiencing these symptoms, or I'm having a hard time losing weight, or whatever it is. And sometimes that can get you some extra labs. But yeah, that's the gist of it with TSH. And then free T4 and free T3, Jess will go over the ranges.
And another thing, so if you're in Canada, most people do have benefit health insurance in Canada. For example, I know a lot of people who couldn't get this coverage, who even when they said, I need this because of this and this, they still wouldn't run it because there was no reason to. So the best way to do it is going to a functional health practitioner or a naturopath. If you have benefits, which most people do, it's all covered. And even if you don't, they'll do a repeat workup and they'll do it at kind of very affordable. Another option too.
Yeah.
In terms of free T3 and free T4, so T3 is the active form of the thyroid hormone. So an optimal range of T3 is 3 to 4.4 pg ml. Can I just call it pg ml?
Yeah.
And then the normal range is 2 to 4.4 pg ml. 4 is the inactive reservoir form of thyroid hormone. The optimal range is 1.2 to 1.8 ngdl. And then the normal range is 0.8 to 1. And so measuring both is really important because T4 must be converted to T3. And so in order to, there's several nutrients that your body needs for this conversion, but this conversion can also be suboptimal if you have been dieting for a long time and things like that. Could make this conversion a lot harder in your body. So the common nutrients to help with this conversion is selenium, which is very important. You get that by eating 2 Brazil nuts per day. The other important one is iodine, and good source of iodine, seaweed. I love like roasted seaweed and stuff. Iodized salt, things like that.
Definitely. So like we mentioned previously, the brain, but more specifically, the pituitary gland produces TSH. And basically that's going to come down and tell the thyroid, hey, produce T4, and it'll produce a little bit of T3. Sometimes there's a signaling issue there. So a lot of it too is figuring out why is there a thyroid issue. A lot of the synthesis, again, is going to occur in the thyroid. And the conversion of T4 to T3 occurs in multiple places in the body, the liver, the gallbladder, and the gut. Jess mentioned selenium is going to be the biggest one. And I feel like a lot of us don't get selenium in our diet. Like, who naturally eats Brazil nuts? I don't think they taste that. I eat them for my thyroid. I hate them. I think they're disgusting. I'll dip them in honey and then eat them because it makes them a little better. But another one is going to be iron. Now, just because I say this, do not just go willy-nilly take an iron supplement. We could honestly do a whole podcast on iron. Iron is really interesting. There are plant sources, non-heme and meat, I would say animal sources, that's the word, of iron dietary. So I would start with the dietary sources for plant, nuts, beans, vegetables as tolerated, right? Iron fortified foods, so a lot of cereals, cream of rice. And then for the heme iron, that and meat contains both heme and non-heme iron. Lean meat, seafood, poultry, and then you can also increase iron absorption by pairing those iron-rich foods with something that is rich in vitamin C. So, an example I gave my client the other day, and this sounds so good that I need to make it soon, is like a spinach salad with steak and strawberries. And if you don't have any gut issues, add feta and whatever you want on it. But steak, iron, strawberries, vitamin C, oranges, bell peppers are another one. So we can really increase our iron through that because all those minerals, in addition to zinc is going to be another one, are essential for that conversion of T4 to T3 by the enzyme 5-deiodinase. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm really bad at pronouncing things, so you guys have probably realized this on the podcast at this point. But other essential nutrients, B vitamins, glutathione, magnesium, it's all plays a role. So that's where, like we mentioned, I don't know if it was in this podcast or the other one, that nutrient availability is going to be the biggest thing, but then also thinking about liver detoxification. But so that's where a lot of the conversion issue could come in if we're having limited availability for nutrients.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, like the nutrients piece, like just me, like Haley said, she didn't do a diet in the fall because she checked her thyroid hormones. I did not, and I should have, but I regret doing a cut in the fall. And that is because I probably made issues a lot worse. And in terms of checking your thyroid, I want to bring this up because now that I've been very conscious of my thyroid and my Hashimoto's diagnosis, I've been increasing a lot of these foods. And it is insane how much better I feel from then and now, just adding in iron via food, tons of vitamin C. I'm eating above 2,000 calories, and my body has a lot of these nutrients available to use now. And it has just made a world of a difference. So I like Haley, how you mentioned, you're not just like hopping on an iron supplement and selenium supplements and iodine supplements. Like, guys, if you eat a varied diet of whole foods, Mediterranean style diet, like you're going to get a ton of these nutrients. Yes, being mindful of them, like the selenium and Brazil nuts and iron. Like you need to be mindful of these things, but also just doing a couple of these things, adding in these foods, making sure you're not dieting all the time. Like these are some big things for your thyroid.
Definitely. And that's where when we start somebody out, we'll look at their food logs and see what nutrients they're getting versus what they're not, so we can make custom food suggestions. And there are definitely cases where we will add supplemental iron or supplemental selenium or zinc very often. But especially with something like iron, and especially like with minerals, you need to be very careful with their supplementation because they do have toxicities and they do compete for binding. A lot of them compete with one another, especially when it comes to supplementing iron. You don't want to over supplement iron. And you may not even need iron. You may just need help converting your iron. And that could be vitamin C. That could be also vitamin A, but it could also be gut health. Cause of thyroid issues is gut health because we're, again, like I mentioned, a lot of our thyroid conversion happens in the gut and the liver, as does the absorption of our nutrients. So a big way to just support your thyroid is make sure your digestion and absorption of food is optimal.
I love that.
And then the other thyroid lab that is definitely a special mention, but also insanely important, is going to be our reverse T3. And like I mentioned earlier, to diet or not to diet, these are things that I looked at in my own labs, but also in my clients' lab work all the time, whether it's their yearly physical, we are debating like changing what phase we're in and going into a deficit, or maybe we're investigating some pesky weight gain that we think isn't normal. We will look at what we already mentioned, the TSH, the T3, and the T4, but reverse T3 is helpful for this. And I wish that I could share a diagram, but if you're listening to this on podcast platforms, you won't see it. But if we think about, everyone close your eyes and listen to this part, but we're going to think about a triangle. At the top of the triangle, we have free T4, right? Underneath that, one leg is going to be free T3. That is the optimal pathway. We want it to go down that leg of our triangle, right? That's where the conversion should go. However, during periods of stress, be that from Hashimoto's antibodies, from undereating, just from life stress, the free T4 can get deterred down the other leg of the triangle to our reverse T3, which is essentially, if we think about free T3 being the gas of our metabolism, our gas tank, this is the brakes. Reverse T3 is inactive form of T3. Having elevations in reverse T3, and typically optimal, in our opinion, is going to be less than 15, in my opinion. 12 to 15. We don't want it too low. We don't want it too high. But the doctor's range for this, honestly, I've never seen a doctor test this. Have you?
No.
Literally never. And it's so helpful because it tells us why are we having thyroid issues to a degree and how severe are they? How severe is the stress, right? But the doctor's normal range is from like 9.2 to 24. So it's a very big range. But to me, anything 15 and above shows that we are having some sort of stressor in the body. It could be related to or indicate chronic inflammation or some sort of infection. But a lot of times it just is that stress, right? So that's something that my labs showed me. Not only my TSH was normal, I could pull them up and look, but I don't have them up right now. My TSH was normal. My free T4 was normal. My free T3 went down a lot from last year. It was like 2.3, which is not ideal. And then my reverse T3 was like 17. So right off the bat, I was like, all right, body is stressed, thyroid is stressed. We can't diet right now because that's only going to make it worse, right? So that's where for me, I'm really focusing on my thyroid nutrients. I'm adding in supplementation to support inflammation in the body, inflammation of the thyroid gland. So some glandular support and things of that nature. But that reverse T3 is honestly one of my favorite markers for that reason. And then we also have the antibodies, which you can talk about, Jess.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to mess up the pronunciation, but the two thyroid antibodies are TPO-AB and B. I like to say that better. Thyroid peroxidase antibody. So this is the one that is left to measure Hashimoto. So it measures to see if the body is producing antibodies to thyroid peroxidase. Am I saying that right? Peroxidase. No.
Peroxidase.
Peroxidase.
Everybody has different ways to say things. One of them that really gets me is, how do you say SIBO?
SIBO.
Some people say SIBO. Or everybody says random science words different ways. And I think it's weird the way I think I say SIBO right. And I think I say peroxidase right, but you never really know. Anyway, I get where you're going for.
Yeah. So thyroid peroxidase antibodies. It measures to see if the body is producing antibodies to thyroid peroxidase. Again, commonly measured to see if Hashimoto's is present. Under 10 is optimal, under 35 is normal. The first time I got this tested was literally a couple months ago. And I think mine was at 160 or something along those lines. I know it can be worse, but obviously, like even normal, we're looking for under 35. Big sign that the body is attacking your thyroid. TGAB, so thyroglobulin antibodies. It shows if the immune system is producing antibodies to the thyroglobulin. So under 1 is optimal, under 20 is normal. Both of these, in my experience, when I had just gotten checked, both of them are high. And so in a little bit, I want to talk about what to do if you do see these markers and how to go about it. I can already feel in my body that things are changing. I'm a lot less inflamed from the small changes that I have made. But the main thing is that the importance of checking these antibodies, even if you do have a normal thyroid panel in terms of reverse T3, TSH, and free T3 and free T4.
Awesome. And that little tangent gave me an idea for another podcast episode. So if you're listening, let us know what questions you'd have for this one. But talking about like dealing with the initial steps of finding out that you have something wrong. So like a chronic illness, a mold overgrowth, an autoimmune disease. What are the first things that we do? Because for you, like we haven't even finished your supplement protocol yet. And a lot of people think supplements are the first step when they're not. Like there's so much you can do with your lifestyle. But anyway, like reducing 100%. Inflammation in your body for thyroid is going to be really important too. So especially like Jess mentioned, with the two antibodies, thyroid peroxidase. So whenever we hear the word antibody, I think against. Do you also think that?
I don't, but that's a good way of explaining it.
Yeah. So like when I'm reviewing a GI map and I see anti-gliadin, I think against gliadin. So gliadin is a protein in gluten. when we have celiac disease or leaky gut, which causes that temporary intolerance, we'll see elevated anti-gliadin. In the thyroid, TPO, thyroid peroxidase, that is an enzyme that is needed to create our thyroid hormones. So when we have thyroid peroxidase antibodies, that is an antibody against the thyroid peroxidase, so against the production of thyroid hormones. So when TPO is elevated, we see that in Hashimoto's and Graves' disease patients with thyroglobulin antibodies, also known as TGAB. It's the same thing. It's the attack against thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is stored thyroid hormone reserves. A lot of times we'll see TPO elevated first and then later that TGAB. It's usually when we see those thyroglobulin antibodies that we'll really start seeing the decreased levels of T4 and T3, and in turn that increased TSH, because the thyroglobulin antibody more so impacts iodine, which iodine is needed for the conversion and production of thyroid hormones. So seeing these antibodies at all is going to be pretty concerning. If you're a practitioner listening to this or somebody that reads their own labs, excuse me, I don't know if you could hear my burp, but that was gross. We're not going to cut that out either. It's important that you look at like the full picture of your thyroid, because I think where a lot of people or practitioners might go wrong is they're like, all right, we have all this dysfunction in our thyroid, but they're not looking at how other systems play a role. And you can supplement selenium, for example, up the yin yang, but if you don't get your thyroid antibodies down first, you're still going to have issues downstream. But I thought that was a great breakdown of what the thyroid testing is, and thinking about going to your doctor too and knowing what to ask for. I already mentioned previously, sometimes it helps if you just say you have symptoms or tell them how you're actually feeling, because I feel like a lot of us normalize symptoms of thyroid dysfunction. I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of our thyroid symptoms, like having a lower blood pressure, which we both had, being always cold. People are like, oh, you're just a small girl. Of course you're always cold. Hair thinning and falling out, like barely staying awake through the day. Low sex drive, it can be associated with thyroid. Having poor mood or heightened depression, brain fog, anxiety, like a lot of these things can be easily normalized. So that's where, especially if you're going into an appointment with a typical provider, you can ask for these. If you were to come to us and get labs, what we order is based on your symptoms and your history. If you've never had your TPO and TGABs checked, do it. 100% recommend doing it. But typically for me, I've never had elevations in my thyroid antibodies, so I don't run them every time. And that's what I do with my clients too. If you've never had a Hashimoto's issue, I'm not going to run them all the time, but definitely at least once to check what's going on there. Thinking about the lab ranges and is it normal? We like to think about normal. Sure, you can be normal, what your doctor defines as normal, but that's all you'll be. We think about being optimal, right? Because the normal range, like Jess has mentioned, is way too broad, especially for those of us, like most of you listening, that actually want to find that way to optimize your health. A lot of times, and I learned this when I was doing my dietetic internship in my clinical rotation, which is a lot of where I really learned the nitty gritty for labs. The way I was taught to view labs is by the normal ranges. And it's kind of scary, some of the shit that they normalize. But again, thinking about the people that come into a hospital, they're really freaking sick. So yeah, seeing their thyroid antibodies 300 when they're also like having liver attacks, that's whatever, they ignore that. So the big thing is understanding, if you're so in this space and you're so aware of your body, which is a great thing, and a lot of us are, you're going to notice if your labs are just normal and not optimal. I know, Jess, you do a great job of describing this, like the importance of the functional medicine perspective for testing and like how to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy because like I first got my thyroid antibodies test, and it was multiple years of trying to connect the dots, like looking at my liver enzymes and my cholesterol. Like it takes time, and give yourself a break if you're still experiencing symptoms. Don't quit. Keep looking, because you will connect the dots, and maybe it just comes down to finding a functional health practitioner who can support you in like next steps, because it can be really confusing. And even me, like as a nutritionist, and even seeing my own lab markers and my Hashimoto's diagnosis, like seeing those numbers, it's scary when you have oh gosh, like how did this happen even though I'm doing all that
Yes.
healthy things?
Yes, I definitely had that moment
Right?
too when I saw my blood work, and I've had it with clients too. So that's where I think something else to mention is don't nitpick your labs to death, right? Because I know I've had clients say this to me too, where they're feeling pretty good, they're living their life, they're
Mm-hmm.
doing their thing, and then we get their labs and their thyroid's tanked, or their liver enzymes are sky high, or something is off.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh my God, but I feel so good. And I'm like, focus on that. Focus on
Yeah.
feeling so good. That's how it was for me as well, where I was like, all right, I know I've been stressed. I don't have symptoms and I want to keep it that way. So that's where
Yeah.
just because labs are off doesn't mean you have to baby yourself. It doesn't mean you have to stop everything that you're doing and change everything. But it does
Yeah.
mean you need to really ask yourself, what could I be doing better? And one of the big things that we see, especially with the thyroid, is just people overdoing it and people overtraining and under eating. So those are the biggest things to look at. Like, you don't have to go from training 5 days to training one, but if you're training 5, 6, 7 days a week, and when I say training, I don't just mean lifting. So if you're lifting 4 or 5 times a week, but you're also doing a Pilates class, you're also doing a HIIT workout, you're also doing a 60-minute long Peloton ride. How many days are you truly doing activity outside of a walk? Look at that and think about, okay, is this too much? Is this too intense? Because that, again, is going to be one of the major drivers for suboptimal thyroid function. But again, just because you have labs that are off, it doesn't mean that you have to like, whoa, think that you're broken because you're not broken. There are things that just need help being optimal.
That was perfect. I like how you say don't freak out. You have to go based on how your body feels too.
Especially if
Right.
you're someone that's done so many different protocols. Like that's how I was feeling when I got my labs. And I'm even like, I'll share this with you guys too. I just did a mold test for myself. My urine sample has been in the fridge for a week, and Ed opens the
Long
freezer.
time.
No, the freezer, not the fridge, because you have to freeze it. And Ed
Yeah.
opens this. He was like, oh, this is still here. I was like, I'm so sorry. Like it said I can mail it within 30 days. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I was just only expecting your urine to be in the freezer for one day, but I'll get over it. And I was like dying. But anyway, so it's especially if you've done so many things for your health, because I feel like there are two ends of the spectrum where you're just starting this journey, you're just figuring out what's going on and starting to implement. But there you're also on the other side of it where you've been doing this for 2, 3, 4 years, and it seems like one thing after another. And the last thing you want to do is another protocol or another elimination diet, and you feel kind of okay. That's where you can take a very gentle approach. And that's what we'll do with you with the mold too, Jess. And we do with a lot of clients
Yeah.
is it's like, all right, we can optimize you without you feeling like you're limited in what we're doing. We can optimize you while we focus on training, while we work on lifestyle change to help everything overall, and supplementation can be as minimal as we need it to. Again, we look at budget, but like with my labs, I shared a little bit of this with you guys when I found out that I had EBV. I really didn't change all that much for my lifestyle to have better management of my symptoms. And I have felt so much better. So a lot of it is just fine tuning rather than looking at what you see and being like, oh my God, I need to order 17 supplements. I need to never go to the gym again. And I need to cut out all the caffeine, which, yeah, maybe cut that back a little bit, but you get the idea. Like, big thing is taking it nice and slow, not going down too many rabbit holes, as well as just like working with the right kind of practitioner.
I 100% agree.
And then last thing to go over here, what other steps would you take if you noticed abnormal thyroid levels? And maybe you can even share like what you've done since you got your labs back, because I know that yours wasn't extreme, but you're already noticing that you're feeling better.
The biggest thing is going to be how you deal with stress. Like Haley was saying, are you training every single day? It's not just physical stress, it's emotional stress. So, yes, okay, how much are you training? You need to personalize that to how you're feeling. So, I only do 4 exercises every time I go into the gym. I'm training 4 days a week. Right now, that's working for me, and that's me bringing down physical stress. In terms of mental stress, okay, am I taking breaks during my day? Am I getting AM sunlight in the morning? Sleep. So having a consistent sleep schedule. I know this is harder for some individuals. I'm really pride myself on my sleep, and I'm very sensitive to a change in my schedule. And obviously that's going to get better as I heal from mold, Hashimoto's, things like that. But right now, it's really important to me to have a consistent sleep schedule and be sleeping like 7.5 to 8 hours a night. Limiting blue light exposure is something that can be a really easy change, like wearing blue light glasses at night. Yeah, I know. I love them too. And then, so that's stress and sleep, right? Those are primary. And then diet. I was kind of avoiding gluten beforehand. I would kind of go away on trips and I'd have some gluten and I would feel like I would actually text Haley and be like, I have a gluten hangover. I feel so horrible. And it just kind of got worse and worse over the years. I slowly stopped avoiding it, especially once I got that lab work back. I really did. Now I'm avoiding gluten 100% because it makes me feel so much better. Like it's literally like quality of life for me at this point. And maybe I can reintroduce it once I do figure out my thyroid antibodies and the mold. Like I hope to reintroduce it. The other thing I did remove was dairy and soy. Honestly, like these two things, I can't even, like it has made such a huge difference with those two. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, like that's a lot. Dairy, soy, alcohol, gluten. I don't think I could do that. Maybe this is just for a short period of time. That's what we do at Girls Fuel. Okay, maybe we need to do these eliminations until we get your body functioning optimally. But honestly, even just those changes, like I feel so much better pooping twice a day. Like
Oh,
I feel so much better. I love how I mentioned that pooping twice a day.
we had to talk about poop at least once.
Right now, I'm keeping stuff very minimal. I am on some liver support, the classic ones like magnesium, fish oil. I'm really paying attention to those thyroid nutrients that we did talk about. I'm eating a lot of food right now in terms of, so I had to reverse on my cut, which I regretted, reversed it up my cut. And now I'm like, I want to make my way up, keep going way above 2000 calories. And again, don't follow my recommendations, but this is like personalized to me. But right now I'm eating about like 2200 calories, lots of protein, lots of carbs, lots of fats, and I feel amazing. And I'm just going to continue to increase that because I keep feeling better personally, and my symptoms keep getting better. And I'm sure my thyroid has gotten a lot better as well. And again, Haley and I, in terms of like next steps, I'm not quite sure exactly what I'll be doing, but again, since I do have a lot of these things down, I can take a very minimal approach. And we talked about the minimal effective dose, which is kind of big for me as well.
Yeah. And that's the big thing because yes, we may treat it like quote unquote a protocol because I feel like a lot of people think about that. They're like, do I need a protocol for this? Do I need a protocol for that? And I'm like, yes, but I like to remove that word and just be like, hey, these are the changes that we're making for right now. Because when
Yeah.
we think
Yeah.
protocol, we think a laundry list of things to do that isn't feasible to do long term. And especially if you have thyroid downregulation, and a lot of times we'll see clients' labs from this year, but we'll also see the history, like 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and we'll see trends with thyroid numbers. And it will take time to see improvements. Like I have a client who has Hashimoto's and her doctor is great. Like she runs her thyroid labs and a couple other things like cholesterol we watch every 6 months. And that's like rare. So it's
That's
been really
great.
cool to watch things, but I also always encourage her to not stress over the fluctuations in them because there are a lot of variables that can impact your numbers on a day to day. So the biggest thing is just finding what that minimum effective dose looks like
Yeah.
for you, and also considering other systems of the body. Again, you're not going to optimize your thyroid if your gut or liver health are sluggish. We won't go into what signs and symptoms of are for those two right now because we've done other podcasts on that. But remembering that biggest thing, we're going to want to maximize nutrient density. Usually that means getting more calories in. Blood sugar stabilization is going to be key as well, which will also come down to eating regular meals every few hours that are balanced carbs, protein, fat, focusing on reducing inflammation, whatever that may mean to you, whether it means reducing toxin exposure, reducing inflammatory foods, temporarily removing dietary triggers, and also customizing the diet and supplement regimen for that. But big thing I hope you get from this is understanding what your thyroid does outside of just help you lose or maintain weight, what signs and symptoms to look for a downregulated or even upregulated thyroid, how to go about asking for testing, how to advocate for yourself in that way, knowing what to look for when you do get these labs back. But again, every approach is going to be individualized. So that's where communication with your doctor as well as your care team which we recommend getting some sort of coach or specialist in on, is going to be key. So that way your approach is not only sustainable, but also customized to you and all systems of your body at once. And I think that was a good place to leave it. So this was definitely a jam-packed episode. So I hope that you enjoyed it. If you're listening, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Make sure you subscribe, share this with a friend, and mention us on the Instagram if you share it on there. And we'll talk to you soon.